Hey everybody, welcome to DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kel. With me as always is my brother Brendan. Together we make movies with DBS Films. In today's episode, we're going into how quantity will make quality in filmmaking. We're going to have a two-part episode basically outlining our theory and really a model that's been successful for not only DBS Films, but the other businesses we have and realistically life in general. And honestly, it's something that we see is a little bit lacking in the filmmaking and creative industry. So we just want to basically outline what we think is one of the best ways to go ahead and improve your skill set. It's just by making a ton of projects and finishing them, most importantly. That being said, be sure to take a look at our Discord channel online because we make movies for our fans with our fans. If you ever want to be part of the process, work with us, be on set on these projects, all you got to do is join that Discord channel. So I think this is a philosophy that both me and you really embrace when it comes to just an overall lifestyle, I will say. And I think it's something where a lot of the most successful creatives out there, there's a lot of different books, 10,000 hours and studies and things like that show the more you do something, the more you do repetition, the better you will get. But really in these two-part episodes, we want to kind of talk about the overall theory that we have in our filmmaking process because honestly, it's completely lacking in my experience in looking at other indie filmmaking. So, Brent, I think the first place to start is, we always mention that these movies are stepping stones. Each movie is an improvement upon itself to get better and better. And honestly, it's really kind of something you don't see a lot in the indie filmmaking because what you'll typically see is someone will think, hey, I got my first feature. I'll make my feature. Boom, next thing you know, I'm going to get a bigger feature. And from there, I only got to make one or two movies and then I'll be successful. So in your opinion, do you kind of see the mindset that we have is starkly different from other indie filmmakers out there?
Yeah, it's definitely a mindset shift, not only in filmmaking, but in business in general. Everybody thinks that their first idea is going to be their best idea, that they're going to become rich and successful. Their film's going to make a lot of money, their business, their product's going to blow up. In my experience, that could happen. You can get very lucky, but those are literally lottery tickets, and it's not really building a foundation of success. What you really want to do is try and make as many movies as possible, start as many businesses as possible, because you can really start to see, what works and what doesn't work. This is the biggest issue I see with filmmakers today is they get so attached to an idea, to a concept, to a movie that they want to make that they can make this movie and nobody will want to watch it. It just doesn't have an audience. And I see this all the time. Filmmakers fall in love with the concept, but there's nobody to watch the movie. And it's better to take, that $100,000 or $200,000 or whatever your budget is, split it into 10 movies, and then try and figure out which movies have an audience, which movies resonate with people, and then build on those successes. Cut out the ones that don't work and just kind of follow the ones that do work. This is what we do. We make a lot of movies. We make them very quickly. And through the 13 that we've made so far, I can see which ones perform better than the other ones that just kind of don't perform as well. And what do? We remake the ones that perform really well. So we're always getting better. We're always finding our audience. We're rewarding our audience with better products, but we're not getting stuck in that trap of spending $200,000, $300,000 on a movie that nobody might want to watch. And you can make the best movie ever, but if nobody wants to watch it, you're kind of, in a sticky situation. And especially in the beginning with independent filmmakers, there's so much risk, there's so much pressure on the line. You may only get a few shots at doing this. Spending all your money on one concept it's very difficult to do that. And you're not creating a foundation of success.
It really is a horror story that we've kind of seen because, again, I consume all things indie film when it comes to either just podcasts or just stories or things like that. And I think one of the biggest issues that we've always mentioned is Hollywood sets the scale so skewed. Hollywood's working in the sense where 1 to 5 million is a micro budget. They're working in the sense where there's just tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in these projects. And when people are exposed to that, they think, hey, this is the process. These are the costs here. And I think they really kind of get blinded by the idea of making it there. And one thing that, we've kind of mentioned, and really we're going to split these episodes up into two kind of theories. This first one's going to be really on the focus of how just making things you really don't know until you know in this process. And then the second episode will be kind of more about how you can apply this process to really start scaling your studio, scaling your productions, and giving you the guys that foundation that will let you continue to have multiple bats out there. So I think the first thing I really want to hop into, as I was kind of mentioning, is filmmaking is very weird because no other creative art do you see people stare at something and say, I can instantly do that. And I will say I was the same way as well too. If someone sees a movie, I can make a movie, I could do this, I could 100% do it. You watch someone, a band or a musician, you're kind of not immediately like that. You see a painter, you see their skill set. So the skill set, I think, of actually making a movie is almost kind of under the surface. People don't actually understand that it's a very stressful management type thing. And really what ends up happening is the script you write is not what you film, and what you film is not what your final product is when you get to the editing table. And I think the big thing I want to cover is you just don't even know this. You don't even know this until you actually go up to the plate. And unlike other medians, for the most part, if you have no filmmaking experience whatsoever, or you have no actual filmmaking, like let's say you're just a commercial director or doing things like that, and you've edited and done small projects, if you haven't done a feature yet, stepping up to that plate is something that is incredibly daunting. And I think it's really wild to me how, people are risking so much on it instead of actually giving yourself a trial. I always say the biggest gap in experience is when you go from not doing something to doing something the first time, because you're just completely unaware of what you're not even good at. So would you say that's kind of been the case through our process and making the movies? I mean, it's funny now because I couldn't even begin to describe to myself what actual filmmaking is like from now if I was talking to myself, pre-gone.
Yeah, and we got very lucky because of, we both have a business background, and the business background is to, start very minimalistic. Start with the minimal viable product. And that's what we did with Gone. And that's what we did with the first 8 movies. We started and made them very cheaply, made them very quickly, and we got a lot of market data on them. If I didn't have that experience, I probably would have put $100,000 into one movie, and it probably would have been gone. And that would have been a horrible mistake. And it would probably been such an awful experience that I probably wouldn't have made another movie. So the fact that we had that is just lucky. But it's what you need to do. It's a much better way to run a business, to run a production company, is to have multiple assets and a diversified portfolio of either business ideas or movie ideas. I think the movie industry kind of weeds itself out because everybody does think that they have a great script. I get sent scripts all the time, and there's always fundamental issues with these scripts. So I think like everyone thinks they can write a movie, they can make a movie, but when push comes to shove, it is a very difficult endeavor. And I think a lot of people will write these scripts, or they kind of just get these high concept ideas, and then they kind of get stuck at that phase. Because taking a good idea, a good concept, and turning it into a script, actually sitting down and writing the idea out, fleshing it out, is a pain point. It's difficult to do that. Writing a full 90-page script is very, very difficult. Some people will get to that point, and then you're stuck with having to raise money, having to get a crew, having to put all this stuff together. That's another pain point that gets people stuck. The people who do actually are able to raise that money or able to get producers or investors on there, then they're stuck with the pain point of actually directing one of these things. And I think a lot of people, we've said it before in other podcasts, they just don't have management experience. And when you don't have management experience, what is being on set? You're managing a ton of people with not only a time pressure, but just a pressure to perform all within a very short amount of time. And it's a very volatile experience. If you don't have any experience managing just basic people in a 9-to-5 setting, it's very, very difficult. I mean, this is my day job. I've been doing this stuff for 10 years, managing people, and going on set is extremely difficult every single time. So if you're putting someone in here who, most creatives are kind of by themselves, they're either editing, they're writing, or they're kind of doing very basic videography stuff. You're putting them in this situation where all that stuff kind of takes a back seat, and you have to be the manager. Can be very difficult. And then once it gets to the editing point, at that point, it's probably the biggest pain point for most indie filmmakers, because you have to look back at all your mistakes and you have to be like, all right, how do I fix this? And you could be looking at 90 minutes of just pure mistakes. And that could be very, very difficult. It's a huge pain point. And it's the reason why most people do not upload a final product, because they're just like, listen, I took my shot. I'm done. It didn't work out, and I'm going to go on to something else. And that's why most movies end up in the void. But if you can do this and you could fail and you understand how to fail properly, which is do a lot of these movies, fix them up the best they can, upload them, and just find out who likes them. It's just a better business model. It's going to be better emotionally for you. And I think it's just a better idea how to run a film industry in, 2023.
I mean, it's exactly that. And I think really to kind of sum all of this up and what we're trying to instill with everyone listening is, if you had the opportunity to make $100,000 movie, which is micro, nothing budget, as I've been told before from other shows and podcasts, or $10,000 budgets, we are going to say the $10,000 budgets every single time, 100% of the time, because you do not have the ability to actually manage and execute on that. It's something that, even us as we're developing now, we would want to gradually scale up into those budgets. It's because you just don't even know. And I think one of the big things I want to start pointing back to is, I think this was honestly some of the bigger slowdowns when it comes to DBS. And again, this is why you have MVPs. This is why you do this. You learn every single time you make a movie, you learn. And I think the biggest learning experience for the Hateful Eight, if I have to go back and look at it, is I really wish from the very beginning we had embraced the model of kind of trying to do everything ourselves. And here's the thing, having a team, absolutely fantastic. Everyone part of these movies was absolutely fantastic in getting it done. But there is such a massive benefit from doing the job yourself to understand what you can and can't do. So then you can scale from there. Eventually, do we want to have teams? Yes, a million times over. We want to have teams, multiple production teams and things like that. But going through the process yourself, you will understand every single aspect. I think every single filmmaker out there, it's never been easier to film. It's never been easier to edit. It's never been easier to get audio. That means you have to do it all. And unfortunately, in the film industry, because of Hollywood and the money they have, I think people are very segmented in what they want to try. And I think literally doing a movie by yourself, in the sense of filming it, writing it, filming it, and editing it, is going to be the best thing you can ever possibly do. And really for us, while we did have our hand in the mix for the first 8, it wasn't until The Girl in Cabin 13 when we really kind of fully embraced that. And I think that was when we really saw the traction kind of moving forward, because again, a lot of issues that come up in filmmaking, and we see it all the time, is if you're not quite sure what the DP is saying is something that works or not, or if you're not quite sure if the editor is saying something that works or not, then you kind of defer to their opinion, and they may or may not be as inexperienced as you. Whereas if you've done something, you can easily say, no, don't do that. Yes, do that, or something like that. I think that is a level of experience. You see it in other businesses. Typically, you have to make your way up through the ranks before you get to manager in that sense. And it's just something that's pretty unique in the film industry.
Yeah, I think your last analogy hit the nail on the head. You have to move up in any other job. You start at the bottom and move up, and you learn those skills so you can delegate those skills to other people when you get in a management role. When you start a movie, you want to direct this movie, you're the boss already, because you're the one coming with the money, or you raise the money. If you haven't worked your way up, if you don't know how to do lighting, if you don't know how to work with a DP, if you don't need how to work with like an AD, if you don't know how to work with actors, all these small little things that go into making a really good movie, if you don't have experience doing that kind of stuff, you're going to be in trouble. Because when you start delegating and trying to get people to work on this project and do things like you want, do things like what you have in your head, you're going to have a hard time, because what you may be asking of them may not be something they either know, or it could be incorrect completely. Like Kel was saying with the DP, you don't know. There's so many variables as far as like what goes into a shot, whether it's lighting, just the acting, the lens, the focal lengths, all that stuff goes into making a shot. And you don't know if that shot's going to work. There's some shots that you just cannot get. It's just too bright out, or it's too dark out, or you just don't have the correct lighting setup. You have to know how to do that stuff. So my advice is just, make sure you can do this movie by yourself. It's very difficult, but it's a good learning process. And if you fail at it and you just kind of struggle with it, you'll learn from your mistakes and get better. But I think the biggest thing is you don't realize how much each phase of these movies is tied together. So the writing phase directly correlates to the directing phase, which also correlates to shooting the movie, which also correlates to editing the movie. All these things are intertwined, and it took me a little bit to kind of realize this stuff, but I write movies in a specific way because I know what shots we can pull off and which ones we cannot pull off. And then, I take that stuff and it makes my production easier. And while we're on production, I'm doing things that I know will make editing easier for myself. So they're all kind of the three phases of filmmaking, all kind of fleshed together. So if you're making the mistake of just hiring a writer, hiring a DP, hiring a director, and then hiring an editor, they're not going to have that synergy that you have. And going into it, I'm writing easy scenes, I'm shooting easy scenes, and I'm editing easy scenes. The reason I'm doing this is because I have the experience to get it done, and it makes the entire process so much easier.
That really is the case. I think it highlights a big thing too, because, again, as the filmmaker, you are the business owner, you're the CEO, everything's really riding on you. Now, you might have partners or something like that who are just as enthusiastic about the project, which is great. I think that's one of the benefits that we have is we have two people that are very motivated about getting these projects finished. But if you're hiring a writer, they're just a writer. And if they're just a writer, what are they going to do? They're going to write the best thing that they possibly can. Then you're going to hire a DP. And what are they going to try and do? They're going to try and film the best thing that they possibly can. So you're going to take a lot of time for timing. They're going to take a lot of time for lighting and whatnot. And if you hire an editor, what are they going to try and do? Well, they're going to try and just edit what you have. But if it's not working together, are they going to get creative? Are they going to look into solutions? Are they going to do things? No, they're just getting a paycheck. And that's no problem against them because this is your responsibility. And if you don't have the experience in each one of those departments, you don't even have an anchor point. A lot of times in the first 8, there were things that we would do that we'd never do again, whether it's the writing phase, whether it's the filming phase, whether it's the editing phase, all of these things. And I think the biggest thing that you mentioned on that I really want to highlight is you're the one that suffers the pain of it. You're the one that suffers the pain of going through this process, finishing it, uploading it, trying to recuperate your costs, all of those expenses, everything that is coming with this process is no one's going to treat it the same as you. And I think the biggest thing to kind of get out of this is if no one is going to experience that pain, you have to go through that process yourself. So then when you get to points where some writer might write something, you can put your foot down and say, no, this is way out of the budget. Or you can put your foot down and say, no, the scene should not be lit like this. We don't need a dolly cam, get the steady cam out of here, whatever that might be. And if you're editing, you can say, well, we need to finish this. We need to do this. And everything, as you mentioned, is intertwined. So setting yourself up from the very beginning to the end is something we didn't even understand. I mean, like right now, if you could go back, would you film any of those scripts that we had for the Hateful Eight?
I mean, I film like Into the Forest and Unseen, but that'd be it. Like we go back and look at movie number 2, which is The Invited. And I mean, what you're just talking about as far as setting yourself up for success, just having a concept in a script, I would wager that's probably 90% of the downfall of most independent filmmakers. The Invited is a case study in a script that is just extremely ambitious. It needed multiple locations. It needed a huge cast and crew. It was just very difficult to pull off. Even now, if I gave that a huge budget, it's going to be very hard. Like that movie, the minimum budget I would ever try and attempt that movie again at is probably $1 million. And that would have to be some sort of studio movie, independent horror, like a Blumhouse, A24 kind of movie. I could do it for cheap, but when I say cheap, it's going to be $1 million just because of how crazy that script is. To pull that idea off is very, very difficult. The other ones, I mean, you can kind of move them around. I could kind of tailor them to a little bit more of our style because we understand what we can do now as far as like breaking things down, being very minimalistic. But a lot of those ideas like Devil in the Room, Morgan Estate are both very, very ambitious projects that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole right now, because it's one thing to get a movie done And it's another thing to execute properly on that movie and give it the budget, the time, the acting, and everything that it needs to have in order to be successful. And those ones require a lot to be successful, where something like Into the Forest or Unseen, they're very minimalistic. They're very easy to get the story and the concept across on a budget. So those ones are just better movies as far as those movies put us in a place to succeed going into the project, going into production. And once again, I think most filmmakers, they get this crazy idea, the idea that they love so much, and they can never break away from it. They can never pivot to another idea. And I guarantee you, just from the stuff that I get on a personal daily basis, as far as scripts, when they're like, I'm like, what's your budget? And they're like under $100,000. And then I read the script, and the first scene, the budget has car explosions. People are jumping off of hospitals. They're doing all this crazy stuff. And you just don't understand how much that stuff costs. But it's not only cost, it's just time. You just don't have it on an indie set to pull off these shots properly, to make them execute properly. You have to have skill and you have to have time. And unfortunately for independent filmmakers, those are both resources that are very scarce.
I mean, that really is the case in the sense that, you don't even understand, because again, I remember The Invited. I remember reading The Invited script and like, this is perfect. Green light, let's go. And now, because of our experiences, we do understand. And with Into the Forest, The Haunting of the Suicide House, those movies got remakes. Why was that? Because the concept was actually within that scalable level that we have as a budget. So really, any indie filmmaker listening out here, your first goal is really just getting something done. I mean, really just getting it from point A to point B, getting it uploaded, even if it's just uploaded on YouTube, doesn't even get to distribution. To me, having a no budget movie that you upload to YouTube is vastly more important and better in a strategic sense than actually putting any kind of wager out there, because you just really don't know what things cost until you go through the process. I mean, it really is the case. And I think kind of the last thing I really kind of want to, harp on when it comes to just you don't know what you know is every single time that we made a movie, we thought it was the most strategic thing possible. And I think we're going to be 10 movies from here and we're going to look back and be like, oh gosh, what are we doing? And unlike other things where you can try, unlike other things where you have a guidance. I mean, film school has its pros and cons, but film school is training you for the Hollywood system. This is really something where until you go through the process yourself, you have no clue about it. And I mean, we made, 8 of these movies that, again, Morgan Estate and Devil in the Room, that was 7 and 8. Both of those concepts were questionable. Both of those times we were reaching out above what the means truly were to make the movie in. And that's 4 years of filmmaking. That's 8 movies. That's more movies than most people do. So, do you really just want to kind of comment on how it is something where you have to have the mindset that you know nothing, and you have to have the mindset that you're going to develop. And the only thing that I think we're really starting to build DBS around is actionable things that happen. We were on set, this happened, this scene works, that scene doesn't work. A lot of times people don't even get through the editing room. And this is why I say something uploaded to YouTube is much more important, because if you get through the editing process, you can actually take a step back. You can look at what you made and you can say, this works, this works, this works. And I would say a lot of our movies from 1 to 8 go from barely anything works to more things work to now we're getting to the point where pretty much all of the scenes are working in some degree.
I think the biggest thing is how much you improve movie to movie. And I really think if I sat down with a new filmmaker and they're just sold on the $100,000, $200,000 one-time movie, and I was able to sit down and show them with each movie how much better we get, they would 100% just go to the 10 movie model. The difference, especially so go back and watch Morgan Estate and Devil in the Room, then watch Girl in Cabin 13, and you can see the exponential jump. And then since we've taken over and we do everything ourselves now, from Girl in Cabin 13 to the one that's going to be released now, Forest of Death, that jump is absolutely exponential. It is like night and day, and that's within 3 movies. then the jump from Forest of Death to Into the Forest 2.0 is another huge jump. And we scaled back on the Roger project, but I'm going through looking through footage now, and I think not only is his story going to be really good, it looks really good. And this is at a fraction of a budget of Girl in Cabin 13, of a lot of the other movies that we've done. With each movie, we get so much better. And I think that that's just how you have to see it. And I think it goes back to what we originally talked about, which is most filmmakers say they're going to make one movie, they're going to become famous, it's going to make $100 million at the box office, and then they don't have to work as hard moving forward. They can kind of do their own ideas because someone will just give them $100 million every single time. Doesn't work like that. I think this model is much more sustainable. With each movie, we get exponentially better, exponentially better. And then guess what happens when you get better? You can start to take on more aggressive projects, more aggressive ideas. I could go back and do The Devil in the Room in the Morgan Estate. Would I do it right away? No, because I have better projects that I could do, but I could tell those stories much better because my writing is better, my production is better, and my editing is better. And I'm probably 3 or 4 movies away from even going back to looking at those projects because I know that I'm just not there yet. And it's kind of humbling because it's kind of an ego check saying, look, I know where I am as a filmmaker. I'm getting better with each one. I want to tell these ideas. I want to tell these stories, but I'm just not there yet. And I think you as a filmmaker, to understand that concept, where you are in this process, what you're capable of, is the first thing you really need to do to get good at this stuff, because you will stop biting off more than you can chew. You'll probably scale back a little bit. And when you scale back, you start to focus on the story. And the most important part of filmmaking is the story. And a lot of stories require just a little bit more attention and detail to the acting, to the story, to the production. And when you start with $100,000, $200,000 budgets, it's very hard to give it that attention that it needs.
It's exactly that. And, really what ends up scaling and growing out of this is just the understanding of that. I think we really didn't even have the understanding of that. I think the last thing I really want to mention on for this episode is when people think of filmmaking, they honestly kind of think of probably the writing process and filming. I feel like they don't even think of the editing process, really. Like they don't really even think of that. But here's a whole nother process that people aren't familiar with: marketing and distribution. This is something where what ends up happening when you finish a movie is that you have so many variables that go right or wrong, and typically they go wrong. And when something goes wrong, it gives you the best experience. What happens when you have issues with actors? What happens when you have issues with the team? What happens when you have issues with uploading? What happens when you go through quality control? What happens when how do you get the most clicks on this? What ends up happening here? There is such a giant ripple effect that happens from making a movie that if you sat down with someone who hasn't even made a movie, you would literally sit there and you would basically say, hey, what are you doing about quality control? What's going to happen if, you end up having this issue with audio? What's your plan for marketing? Who are you going to go with distribution? They wouldn't even know. And it's something that you don't know until you go through that process. So do you want to talk about how all of the ripple effects that happen from making a movie are things that you really wouldn't even think of encountering before you actually go through the process?
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot to this process. It's very time consuming. Usually for most independent filmmakers, when they start or when they actually finish post-production, it's going to take a year to get this thing uploaded. We're a little bit faster. I mean, our last one did 6 months. We're trying to get this one done in 4 months. But you have to go through this process a lot. And we're still going through the process. We're trying different avenues. We tried different distribution companies. We're trying different aggregators. And there's always hiccups. Like you just have to learn how to do it. I think the one problem with the whole film industry is just very segmented. You have sales agents, you have distribution companies, then you have platforms, and all these things need attention and care. And if you don't have a business background, you don't know how to negotiate with these people, you don't know how to do these things, it could really beat you down. And if you're really going in there once again with one movie, the first one is just a learning experience. When we uploaded Girl in Cabin 13 and we got our first big distribution deal, I obviously negotiated for the best contract that I possibly could, but in my mind, I was like, I don't need a cent back. All I need is to just learn from this process, learn what to do, what not to do, and, take that information and apply it to Murder House. And that's what we did. We got very fortunate that we got a very good deal, and Girl in Cabin 13 did very, very well, especially on Tubi. But I did learn a lot of lessons, and we moved to another distribution company that I thought fit our model a little bit better. And then now we're using aggregation for the next one to kind of feel out whether or not this works for us as well. But this just goes back to having multiple movies. If you only have one movie, you don't benefit from doing all this stuff multiple times. You're not going to kind of figure out the little hacks that you need to know in order to get very good at this stuff. So it's not just movies, but this distribution, it's marketing all the way through the process. In order to be successful at this, in order to create a business and not just a one-time movie, you almost have to be a production company. That's just the bottom line.
That really is the case with it. And like you said, the diversification, I mean, if you only got one movie, you spent 100 grand on it, you can't look past it. We always have something in the pipeline that always helps us to move on and get to the next project there. So that's going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. In the next episode, we're going to kind of get into a little bit more nitty gritty of what you actually learn from having more quantity when it comes to your productions, and how that is going to lead to a much improved quality. Be sure to take a look at our Discord channel online, because that is the place to be if you want to work for our movie, or if you want to